Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and settle in for a story that's a little less about triumphs and more about the tough truth behind them. We often marvel at Roman roads, aqueducts, and colosseums, right? You picture gleaming white marble, grand arches stretching across valleys, and bustling cities with advanced plumbing. But have you ever stopped to think about the brutal truth about Roman engineering's dark side? Imagine for a moment that you're not a tourist admiring these ancient wonders, but one of the countless souls who built them. Suddenly, those impressive structures take on a far more sobering hue. You'd quickly realize that behind every magnificent arch and every perfectly paved road lay an untold story of immense suffering, relentless toil, and often, death. It's a reality that might make you shift uncomfortably, because while the Romans were masters of construction, their methods were frequently barbaric. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your current location and time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a vast construction site, the air thick with dust, the clang of hammers, and the shouts of overseers. This isn't just a simple road being laid. This is Rome, building its empire, one stone, one brick, one forced labor at a time. The grand scale of Roman engineering is undeniable. Think of the network of roads stretching thousands of miles across the empire, connecting distant provinces, facilitating trade, and allowing legions to march swiftly. Or consider the majestic aqueducts, delivering fresh water to sprawling cities, some of which still stand today, a testament to enduring design. Then there are the awe-inspiring public buildings, the vast bath complexes, the imposing basilicas, and of course, the iconic Colosseum, a structure that could hold tens of thousands of spectators. These were not just functional, they were statements of power, wealth, and mastery over the natural world. But here's the catch. These monumental achievements weren't built by advanced machinery or intricate robots. They were built by hand. Your hands, perhaps. If you were unlucky enough to live in the wrong place at the wrong time, this is where the dark side emerges, shimmering just beneath the surface of all that glory. The resources required for such massive undertakings were immense. Not just stone and timber, but human muscle, sweat, and often, blood. The Roman approach to large-scale construction was brutally pragmatic if a task was difficult, dangerous, or backbreaking. It was assigned to those who had no choice. One fundamental truth that underpins almost all Roman engineering is the pervasive and brutal reality of slavery. You see, while Roman society had a complex hierarchy, at its very base were millions of enslaved people. These individuals were not merely household servants, they were the engine of the Roman economy and the silent, often forgotten, workforce behind its greatest architectural feats. Imagine being bought and sold like property, your entire existence dictated by another, with no rights, no personal freedom, and no recourse. Your skill, your strength, your very life became a tool in the hands of the Roman state or wealthy contractors. Historians still debate the exact percentage of the Roman population that was enslaved, but estimates range from 15% to as high as 40% in some periods and regions. Particularly in Italy, that's a staggering number. You might encounter enslaved people from conquered lands, prisoners of war, or those born into slavery. Their lives were cheap, and their labor was essentially free. This economic model created an inexhaustible supply of muscle for the most demanding tasks. When you look at a Roman road, you're not just seeing stones, you're seeing the lives of countless enslaved individuals who broke those stones, transported them, and laid them under the blazing sun or in the chilling rain. The conditions under which these enslaved laborers worked were often horrific. You might be forced to work from dawn till dusk, with minimal food and water, under the constant threat of the whip. Overseers, themselves often brutal, pushed enslaved gangs to their physical limits. If you faltered, if you tired, the punishment could be severe beatings, starvation, or even death. There was little incentive to preserve the lives of these laborers beyond the immediate need for their strength. If one enslaved person died, another could easily be acquired or bred. This disposable attitude towards human life is a chilling aspect of Roman engineering. It certainly makes you appreciate your lunch break, doesn't it? It doesn't. The scale of death and injury on these projects was undoubtedly immense. Accidents were common. Imagine working in a quarry, moving massive blocks of stone with rudimentary tools and little safety equipment. A falling rock, a slip, a misstep could mean instant death or a crippling injury. On large construction sites, scaffolding could collapse, trenches could cave in, and heavy loads could crush workers. If you were injured, there was little medical care available, and a severe injury often meant a slow, agonizing death, or a lifetime of begging as a useless mouth to feed. You certainly wouldn't be collecting workers' compensation. The Roman military also played a crucial role in engineering, and their labor, though technically free, was often just as brutal. Soldiers, particularly legionaries, were not just fighters, they were engineers, builders, and laborers. You'd spend countless hours digging ditches, building fortifications, constructing bridges, and laying roads. This was part of their daily discipline, a way to keep them fit and occupied when not fighting. While they might have been better fed and housed than enslaved laborers, their work was equally strenuous and dangerous, often performed in harsh conditions and hostile territories. This military engineering was essential for the expansion and maintenance of the empire, but it came at a significant physical cost to the soldiers themselves. Furthermore, the materials used in Roman engineering themselves often came from places of immense suffering. Think of the mines from which metals were extracted for tools, or the quarries that provided the stone for buildings. These were often places of unimaginable hardship, where enslaved people and condemned criminals were sent to work until they died. The extraction of raw materials, the very foundation of Roman engineering, was a process steeped in human misery. You'd be deep underground, in stifling heat and darkness, chipping away at rock, knowing that escape was impossible and death was a constant companion. The Roman fascination with grand-scale and monumental achievements often overshadowed the human cost. They were masters of organization, capable of mobilizing vast numbers of people and resources. But their ethical framework for labor was, by modern standards, appalling. The concept of worker safety, fair wages, or human rights was virtually non-existent. The drive for efficiency and grandeur trumped any concern for individual well-being. This is a crucial point that historians still debate. Could Roman engineering have reached such dizzying heights without such a brutal system of labor? It's a thorny question, without a simple answer. As you consider the magnificent arches of an aqueduct or the imposing walls of a Roman fort, try to visualize the invisible hands that built them, the tired eyes, the aching muscles, the broken spirits. This isn't to diminish the ingenuity of Roman engineers, who truly revolutionized construction with innovations like concrete and arches. Their technical brilliance is undeniable, but it is to acknowledge the profound moral debt that these wonders carry. The glory of Rome was literally built on the backs of millions, a silent testament to exploitation and hardship. As the image of those tireless, suffering laborers begins to fade, you're left with a powerful realization the marvels of ancient Rome, while inspiring awe, also serve as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both incredible innovation and profound cruelty. It's a complex legacy, one that compels you to look beyond the polished surface and into the grimy, brutal truth that lies beneath. The foundations of Roman power were indeed strong, but they were forged in the crucible of human suffering. You've glimpsed the pervasive shadow of human suffering that falls across all Roman engineering. Now, Let's zoom in on the very heart of this dark truth: slavery's silent scars. Imagine yourself, not as a free Roman citizen, but as an enslaved person, stripped of your identity, your family, and your fundamental rights. Your value is measured solely by your physical strength and your capacity for ceaseless labor. This isn't a romanticized view of ancient society. This is the grim, unvarnished reality that fueled the Roman construction boom. Slavery in ancient Rome was not merely an economic institution. It was deeply embedded in the social fabric, an accepted and fundamental part of daily life. You could become enslaved through various means captured in warfare, born to enslaved parents, or even, in some desperate circumstances, selling yourself or your children into bondage to pay off debts. Once enslaved, your legal status was clear: you were property. A chattel, with no legal standing, no right to marry, and no control over your own body or destiny. You were a tool, to be used, bought, sold, or discarded at the whim of your owner. This inherent dehumanization allowed for the systematic brutalization of millions, all in the name of Roman prosperity and power. The scale of enslaved labor employed in Roman engineering projects was immense, almost unfathomable. Think of the sheer numbers required to construct a 100-mile aqueduct, or to pave thousands of miles of roads across vast and varied terrain. These weren't small, specialized crews. These were legions of enslaved individuals, toiling under the open sky, their bodies pushed to the breaking point. You might find yourself alongside hundreds, even thousands of others, all chained together by the commonality of your suffering, each an expendable cog in the vast Roman machine. The work itself was often exceptionally dangerous. Consider the quarries, the source of the monumental stone blocks that define so much of Roman architecture. You'd be deep in the earth or clinging to a sheer rock face. Wielding heavy hammers and chisels, dust would fill your lungs, the air thick with the sound of chipping stone and the constant fear of rock falls. Accidents were tragically common: a slipped tool, a falling stone, or a collapsing tunnel could mean instant death or a crippling injury. And if you were injured to the point of being unable to work, your utility ceased, and your fate often became even more dire. You'd be a burden, likely left to die, or sold for scrap. On the construction sites themselves, the dangers continued. Imagine hoisting massive beams for a bridge or lifting heavy stones for an arch, with only rudimentary pulleys and the sheer force of dozens of men. One misstep, one snapped rope, and dozens could be crushed in an instant. Scaffolding, built from rough timber, was often unstable. Trenches dug for foundations or sewers could collapse, burying workers alive. Safety protocols, as we understand them today, were non-existent. You were merely a body, a unit of labor, and your individual survival was secondary to the progress of the project. The living conditions for these enslaved laborers were often as harsh as their work. You'd typically be housed in crowded, unsanitary barracks or rudimentary shelters at the construction site. Food would be basic and often insufficient, just enough to sustain you for the next day's labor. Water might be contaminated. Disease, fueled by poor nutrition and cramped living spaces, would sweep through the camps, often claiming more lives than direct accidents. You'd witness your fellow laborers succumb to fever, dysentery, or exhaustion, their bodies simply cast aside, unmourned. The constant threat of physical violence hung over every enslaved person. Overseers, armed with whips and clubs, enforced discipline and maintained the relentless pace of work. You'd hear the crack of the lash, the screams of those who couldn't keep up, a chilling reminder of your own precarious existence. Punishment for insubordination, slowness, or attempted escape was brutal and often public, serving as a terrifying deterrent to others. There was no appeal, no court, no justice. Your master or the overseer held absolute power over your body and your life. This dehumanization extended to every aspect of your existence. You had no personal possessions, no right to choose your work, and no hope for a future beyond endless toil. Even basic human connections were denied. Families were often separated, and any relationships formed were entirely at the mercy of the owner. This systematic psychological and physical abuse left indelible scars, not just on the bodies of the enslaved, but on their very souls. It was a profound violation of human dignity, a silent agony beneath the surface of Rome's architectural grandeur. Historians still contend with the moral implications of this reliance on enslaved labor. While Roman engineering undeniably produced marvels, could such achievements have been realized without the systemic exploitation of human beings? Some argue that the sheer scale and complexity of these projects necessitated a massive, controllable workforce. Others counter that it was precisely this readily available, cheap labor that stifled the development of more labor-saving technologies. The debate continues, but what is clear is that the grandeur of Rome's structures is inextricably linked to the suffering of millions. You cannot truly appreciate the Colosseum without acknowledging the silent screams of those who laid its stones. The irony is striking. A civilization that prided itself on law, order, and advanced thought built its physical foundation on such barbarity. The very roads that carried Roman law and culture across the empire were paved with the sweat and sacrifice of those denied any law or culture of their own. This silent, enduring scar of slavery is perhaps the darkest truth of Roman engineering. It reminds you that beauty and grandeur can often hide profound injustice, and that true progress must always be measured not just by what is built, but by the cost to those who build it. You've grappled with the pervasive, silent scars of slavery in Roman engineering. Now, let's descend into one of the most brutal and unforgiving environments where Roman ingenuity met human endurance: the mines. Imagine yourself far from the bustling Roman forum, deep beneath the earth, in stifling heat and oppressive darkness. This wasn't just hard labor, it was often a death sentence. A grim testament to the insatiable Roman demand for metals, iron for tools and weapons, lead for pipes, gold and silver for coinage and luxury, copper for everything from plumbing to art. The extraction of these vital resources was arguably the darkest corner of Roman engineering's brutal side. Roman mines, scattered across the empire from Spain to Britain, from Dacia to North Africa, were often worked by the most unfortunate segments of society. You'd find yourself alongside condemned criminals, prisoners of war, and, of course, countless enslaved people. Unlike agricultural or domestic enslaved people, those sent to the mines were considered utterly expendable. Their lives were literally worth less than the minerals they extracted. This wasn't a punishment. It was a slow, agonizing execution designed to exploit their bodies until they could no longer move. The conditions within these mines were horrific. Picture yourself descending into narrow, claustrophobic tunnels, often hundreds of feet deep, with only the flickering light of an oil lamp to cut through the oppressive darkness. The air would be thick with dust from hammering and hacking, choking your lungs with every breath. Ventilation was rudimentary, if it existed at all, leading to sweltering heat, especially in deeper shafts, or frigid dampness in others. You'd constantly battle exhaustion, dehydration, and the pervasive fear of what lay around the next corner. The work itself was backbreaking in the extreme. You'd be wielding heavy hammers and chisels, chipping away at solid rock for hours on end. Sometimes, fires would be lit against the rock face to heat it, then suddenly doused with cold water to cause cracks, a process called fire setting. While effective, this filled the mine with noxious smoke and steam, making breathing almost impossible and causing widespread respiratory illnesses. You'd feel your muscles screaming, your hands bleeding, your body slowly breaking under the relentless strain. Safety measures were virtually non-existent. Cave-ins were a constant, terrifying threat. Imagine the sudden rumble, the shower of dust, and then the terrifying realization that tons of earth and rock are collapsing around you, burying you alive in the darkness. There were no reinforced support beams beyond the most basic timber props, and structural engineering within the mines was primitive. Flooding was also a major danger. As groundwater would seep into the lower levels, Roman engineers did develop sophisticated methods for dewatering mines, such as Archimedes' screws and water wheels, often operated by enslaved gangs. While ingenious, these devices simply allowed the brutal work to continue at even deeper, more dangerous levels. You'd be wading through icy water, operating a treadwheel, knowing that a slip could mean drowning in the dark. The sheer human cost in these mines was astronomical. Life expectancy for a miner was incredibly low, often just a few years, sometimes even months, after being sent there. Disease was rampant respiratory illnesses from dust inhalation, chronic lung conditions, skin infections from constant dampness and poor hygiene, and gastrointestinal diseases from contaminated food and water. Accidents were an everyday occurrence, leading to broken bones, amputations, and fatal injuries from falling rocks or exhausted colleagues. You'd witness your fellow laborers collapse from exhaustion, succumb to illness, or be crushed in a collapse, their bodies left to be dragged out and unceremoniously dumped. A common historical fact often overlooked is that Roman mines were essentially state-owned enterprises, often leased to private contractors. The state's primary concern was the output of minerals, not the welfare of the laborers. This institutionalized indifference further solidified the brutal conditions. Historians still debate the precise death tolls in specific Roman mines, as records are scarce, but archaeological evidence and ancient accounts paint a grim picture of mass mortality. The sheer number of unidentified skeletons found near ancient mining sites speaks volumes about the expendability of these workers. The metals extracted from these brutal environments were fundamental to Roman power and prestige. Lead, for example, was used in everything from water pipes and cooking utensils to paints and cosmetics, slowly poisoning the population as we touched on in our discussion of Roman medicine. Remember, iron fueled their tools and weaponry, while gold and silver paid for armies and luxury. You can see the direct link between the suffering in these dark tunnels and the gleaming imperial power of Rome. Every coin, every sword, every lead pipe carried the silent, unseen imprint of unimaginable human misery. The Roman legal system, with its detailed laws regarding property, offered no protection for enslaved miners. Their owners could send them to the mines as punishment or for profit, knowing full well the almost certain fate that awaited them. Even free citizens condemned to the mines as punishment damnatio ad metalla faced conditions scarcely better than the enslaved. It was a hellish existence, a deliberate and systematic form of human exploitation on an industrial scale. The chilling truth about Roman mines is that they represent the ultimate expression of the empire's utilitarian view of human life. The value of an individual was directly tied to their utility, and for those in the mines, that utility was measured only by their capacity to extract resources. When that capacity was exhausted, so too was their life. It's a harsh lesson in the true cost of ancient grandeur, a reminder that the pursuit of power and wealth can lead to unimaginable cruelty. As the echoes of picks against rock begin to fade in your mind, and the dust settles from those ancient tunnels, you're left with a stark understanding of the human price paid for Roman ambition. The gleaming artifacts and impressive structures of Rome, while symbols of incredible engineering prowess, are also monuments to the silenced screams and broken bodies of those forced into the earth's darkest corners. It makes you incredibly grateful for modern safety regulations, for labor rights, and for the fundamental recognition of human dignity. However imperfectly applied, the light of Roman engineering often shone brightest only because of the profound darkness it created for so many. You've descended into the dark, suffocating depths of Roman mines, witnessing the ultimate human cost of resource extraction. Now, let's emerge, blinking, into the equally brutal, yet perhaps more visible, environment of the quarries. Imagine yourself standing at the base of a towering rock face, the sun beating down, the air thick with the ringing of hammers and the shouts of overseers. This wasn't mining in the hidden depths, but the open, exposed, and equally deadly process of tearing massive blocks of stone from the earth itself. The raw materials for virtually every monumental Roman structure, From the grandest temples to the humblest foundations, came from these perilous sites. Extracted through sheer brute force and relentless, unremitting toil, Roman quarries were vast, sprawling operations, sometimes employing thousands of laborers. You'd find them strategically located near major construction projects or navigable waterways, allowing for easier transport of the enormous stones. Places like Carrara in Italy, famous for its marble, or sites across Egypt and North Africa for granite and porphyry, were veritable industrial zones of human misery. The primary workforce, just as in the mines, consisted of enslaved people and condemned criminals. These were individuals whose lives were considered utterly expendable, their suffering a mere footnote in the grand narrative of Roman power. The work in a quarry was relentlessly physical and incredibly dangerous. Picture yourself wielding a heavy iron hammer and a series of wedges, attempting to split a massive slab of rock from the quarry face. This process, called plug and feather, involved drilling a series of holes into the rock, inserting metal wedges the plugs, and two half-round shims the feathers, and then hammering them sequentially until the rock split. It was agonizingly slow, incredibly strenuous, and precision was key. One wrong strike, one poorly placed wedge, and the entire effort could be wasted, or worse, cause a dangerous fracture in the rock. The sheer scale of the blocks extracted is hard to comprehend. Imagine moving an obelisk weighing hundreds of tons, or columns that soared dozens of feet into the air. These were not carved in situ, they were hammered and chiseled from the solid rock and then transported. This required immense physical strength and coordination from thousands of laborers. You'd be part of a team, straining on ropes, pushing on levers, attempting to maneuver these colossal weights. The risk of being crushed by a falling block was ever present, a silent killer lurking in every unstable pile of stone. Safety protocols were, predictably, almost non-existent. Overhanging rock faces could suddenly collapse, burying dozens. The tools themselves, while robust, were rudimentary and often shattered, sending deadly shards flying. Dust, thick and pervasive, would clog your lungs, leading to chronic respiratory illnesses. The sun, beating down relentlessly, caused heat stroke and dehydration, especially in the southern quarries. Rain turned the quarry floor into a treacherous, muddy expanse, increasing the risk of slips and falls. You'd witness your fellow laborers succumb to exhaustion, accidents, or disease, their bodies unceremoniously dumped in mass graves, their lives extinguished for a block of marble. The logistics of quarrying were as brutal as the extraction itself. Once a stone block was split, it had to be dressed, roughly shaped, and then transported. This involved dragging massive stones for miles, often over uneven terrain, using a combination of sledges, rollers, and sheer human muscle power. You'd be harnessed to a massive stone, pulling with all your might alongside hundreds of others, inching it forward, your feet slipping on loose gravel, your muscles screaming in protest. This was often the most backbreaking part of the process, transforming a raw block of stone into a movable commodity. The organization of quarry labor was often as ruthless as in the mines. Overseers, often former soldiers or particularly brutal enslaved people themselves, maintained discipline through constant surveillance and savage punishments. The crack of the whip and the threat of starvation kept the exhausted laborers working at a relentless pace. There was no escape, no rest, and no hope. Your life was simply a unit of labor, to be expended until you could no longer lift a hammer. This systematic exploitation was not an aberration. It was the norm, a cornerstone of Roman engineering. Roman architects and engineers, for all their brilliance in design and construction, rarely, if ever, acknowledged the human cost. Their plans focused on the finished product, the grand monument, not the suffering of those who brought it into being. This detachment highlights a key aspect of the dark side, the systematic dehumanization that allowed such widespread brutality to be considered acceptable, even necessary. The very concept of worker rights, or even humanitarian treatment, was alien to the Roman mindset when it came to enslaved labor. Historians still debate the precise death tolls in Roman quarries. While direct records are scarce, archaeological findings of mass burials near major quarry sites and the sheer physical nature of the work suggest that mortality rates were incredibly high. For example, the granite quarries in Egypt were particularly notorious for their brutal conditions, essentially serving as open-air death camps. You can almost hear the desperate cries echoing through the ages, swallowed by the vast silence of those desolate landscapes. The marble gleaming in the sun on a Roman temple, the granite supporting a massive arch, or the limestone forming the foundations of a city each bore the invisible imprint of unimaginable toil and suffering. The beauty and grandeur of Roman architecture were literally carved from the rock, and from the lives of countless individuals forced into relentless, perilous labor. It's a stark reminder that even the most magnificent achievements can be built on foundations of profound injustice. As the image of those dusty, sun-baked quarry faces recedes, and the ringing of hammers fades, you're left with a deeper, more somber appreciation for the engineering marvels of Rome. They are indeed impressive, but their brilliance is forever intertwined with the brutal truth of their creation. The quiet strength of those ancient stones whispers not just of engineering prowess, but of the silent screams and broken bodies of those who sacrificed everything to bring them forth. You can certainly be thankful that your labor is not measured by your expendability in a rock face. You've endured the crushing realities of Roman mines and quarries. Now, let's shift our gaze to arguably the most iconic and essential facet of Roman infrastructure, the roads. Imagine for a moment, you're not simply driving on a smooth asphalt highway, but laboring on a Roman road in Gaul, thousands of miles from Rome, with nothing but your bare hands, basic tools, and the unwavering demands of the legions. This wasn't just about connecting points on a map. It was about projecting power, moving armies, facilitating trade, and solidifying control over a vast empire. But this monumental network of stone was quite literally paved with pain, sweat, and endless, often fatal, toil. The Roman road network, stretching over 250,000 miles, was an engineering marvel. You can picture those remarkably straight lines, cutting through mountains, spanning rivers, and crossing vast plains. These were not mere dirt tracks. They were meticulously constructed arteries, designed for heavy military traffic and rapid communication. But the construction process was brutally intensive. The sheer scale of moving earth, crushing stone, and laying layers of material required an enormous workforce. And like all large Roman engineering projects, this burden fell disproportionately on the most vulnerable. The primary workforce for road construction consisted of soldiers, enslaved people, and local conquered populations forced into labor. For the legionaries, building roads was a core part of their training and daily routine. You'd spend countless hours digging, moving earth, and breaking rocks, transforming raw landscape into a functional highway. While soldiers were generally better fed and housed than enslaved laborers, their work was equally arduous and dangerous, often performed in harsh weather conditions and hostile territories. This military labor was essential, a direct extension of Roman military might, turning every legionary into a reluctant engineer. For enslaved people, road building was another form of relentless, disposable labor. You'd be part of vast gangs, driven by overseers, working from dawn till dusk under the blazing sun or in the chilling rain. The work was non-stop excavating foundations, compacting earth, hauling heavy stones, and carefully laying the layers of gravel and paving stones. The physical demands were extreme, pushing the human body to its absolute limits. The actual construction process of a Roman road was far more involved than simply dumping gravel. You'd start by digging a trench, often several feet deep, to create a stable foundation. This involved immense earth moving, often using only basic shovels and baskets. Then, layers of different materials would be laid large stones at the bottom, followed by smaller stones, gravel, and finally, a paved surface of fitted stone slabs. Each layer had to be carefully compacted, often by workers literally stamping the ground or using heavy ramming tools. Imagine the constant, repetitive strain on your body, day after day, week after week, and the tools were simple but effective picks, shovels, hammers, and chisels. There was no heavy machinery, no bulldozers, no concrete mixers, at least not in the modern sense for roads. Everything was done by hand. You'd feel the blisters on your hands, the ache in your back, the constant fatigue. And with these rudimentary tools came constant danger. A swinging pickaxe could strike a fellow worker. A falling stone could crush a limb. A slip on uneven ground could send you tumbling into a trench. Safety measures were, unsurprisingly, minimal. Accidents were common and often fatal. If a section of a road needed to cross a difficult terrain, such as a swamp or a ravine, bridges or causeways had to be built. This involved even more perilous work sinking piles into soft ground, constructing arches, and working at heights. You'd be scrambling on rudimentary scaffolding, hoping the timber held, knowing that a fall meant certain death. The very ambition of Roman engineering often directly translated into increased danger for the laborers. One often overlooked detail is the toll that constant exposure to the elements took. Working outdoors for months or years on end, often without adequate shelter, meant you were constantly battling against extreme heat, biting cold, rain, and snow, dehydration, heat stroke, frostbite, and respiratory illnesses were constant companions, weakening bodies and making them more susceptible to injury or collapse. You'd be shivering through a cold night, knowing that another day of back-breaking labor awaited at dawn. The sheer volume of materials required for roads was staggering. Miles upon miles of stone had to be quarried, transported, and shaped. This meant a continuous flow of resources and labor, often extracted from the surrounding landscape, further disrupting local communities and economies. The borrow pits from which earth and gravel were taken, and the local quarries opened to supply stone, became permanent scars on the landscape, just as the work itself left permanent scars on the bodies of the laborers. Historians still debate the extent of forced labor versus voluntary paid labor on Roman road projects. While soldiers were compelled to work, and enslaved people had no choice, there was also a class of free laborers who might take on these difficult jobs out of economic necessity. However, even for these free workers, the conditions would have been exceptionally harsh, wages low, and the risks high. The line between compulsion and dire economic need could often be blurred. Regardless of their exact status, the work was brutal, and the lives of the workers were considered cheap. The legacy of Roman roads is universally admired for their durability and strategic importance. You can still walk on sections of these ancient thoroughfares today, a testament to their engineering excellence. But their enduring strength also serves as a silent monument to the unyielding human effort, the incredible suffering, and the countless lives sacrificed in their construction. The straight lines and solid foundations of Roman roads whisper a brutal truth: progress, power, and glory in the ancient world often came at an immeasurable human cost. As the image of those dusty, sun-baked roads stretches into the distance, and the echoes of hammers on stone fade, you're left with a more profound, and perhaps unsettling, appreciation for those iconic Roman achievements. They are indeed magnificent. But their perfection was forged not just from engineering brilliance, but from the brutal exploitation of human muscle and bone. It certainly makes you grateful for modern construction methods and, more importantly, for labor rights. You've endured the relentless toil of Roman road construction, a testament to human endurance under duress. Now, let's gaze upon another iconic marvel, often revered for its beauty and utility: the aqueducts. Imagine yourself not just admiring a colossal archway stretching across a valley, but hauling massive stones uphill, deep in the wilderness, knowing that a single misstep could send you plummeting to your death. These majestic structures, bringing life-giving water to Roman cities, were built through an agonizing ascent of human effort, often under fatally dangerous conditions. The Roman aqueducts were extraordinary feats of engineering. You can picture them: miles of stone channels, some underground, others snaking across the landscape on towering arches, all designed to transport millions of gallons of fresh water daily from distant springs to urban centers. They solved one of the most fundamental problems of urban living: a reliable, clean water supply. But the sheer scale and precision required for these projects meant that their construction demanded an unimaginable human toll. The primary challenge of aqueduct construction was maintaining a precise, gentle gradient over vast distances. You couldn't just build straight. You had to meticulously survey the terrain, dig tunnels through mountains, and construct elaborate bridge-like structures over valleys and rivers. This precision, so celebrated today, was achieved through sheer, grueling manual labor. And who performed this labor predictably? Enslaved people, condemned criminals, and soldiers. Imagine being part of a team excavating a long tunnel through solid rock. You'd be deep underground, in cramped, suffocating conditions, chipping away at stone with hammer and chisel, often in near darkness, with poor ventilation. The air would be thick with dust, choking your lungs. The risk of tunnel collapses was constant, a terrifying prospect that could bury you alive in an instant. There were no hydraulic drills or blasting charges. Every inch of rock was removed by human muscle, sweat, and breath. When the aqueduct had to cross a valley, the Romans built those famous arched bridges, known as pontes or arches. Constructing these required immense skill and even greater risk. You'd be working at dizzying heights, hoisting massive blocks of stone into place, relying on rudimentary scaffolding and the strength of ropes and pulleys. One slip, one snapped rope, one moment of carelessness, and you'd plummet hundreds of feet to the ground below. Safety nets, harnesses. Forget it. Your life was cheap, and the project's progress was paramount. The materials themselves were colossal. Imagine the weight of the individual stone blocks, some weighing several tons, that had to be quarried, transported, and then lifted into position. You'd be part of a team straining against ropes, pushing on levers, trying to inch these monolithic pieces into place. The constant threat of being crushed by a falling or shifting stone was ever present. This wasn't just heavy lifting, it was dangerous, high-stakes work, where a single mistake could be fatal for many. The work was also incredibly exposed to the elements. Building aqueducts meant working outdoors year-round, regardless of the weather. You'd endure scorching summer heat, biting winter cold, relentless rain, or sudden storms. Dehydration, heat stroke, frostbite, and respiratory illnesses were common, debilitating diseases that would compound the physical strain. And if you fell ill, there was little recourse. You were expected to work until you literally could not stand. A specific, often overlooked, detail about aqueduct construction is the use of cofferdams and caissons for river crossings. To build foundations in flowing water, engineers would construct temporary watertight enclosures, pump out the water, and then build the piers within the dry area. This was incredibly hazardous work. You'd be working in damp, muddy, and often unstable conditions, with the constant threat of the cofferdam breaching and the entire area flooding. This ingenuity, while impressive, simply opened up new avenues for dangerous labor. Historians still debate the specific techniques used for some of the deepest foundations, but all agree it was incredibly perilous for the workers. The precision of Roman aqueducts, allowing water to flow by gravity alone over dozens of miles, required meticulous surveying and careful construction. But this wasn't done with lasers or GPS. It was done with simple tools like the chorobates, a leveling instrument, plumb bobs, and careful eyesight. This level of accuracy, achieved through painstaking manual labor and repeated checks, speaks volumes about the dedication and skill of the engineers, but also the relentless demands placed upon the workers to execute those precise plans. Imagine being responsible for ensuring a perfect gradient, knowing that a slight error could compromise the entire project, with severe consequences for you. The human cost of these projects was immense. Records, as always, are scarce. But the sheer number of laborers, the dangerous conditions, and the lack of safety measures suggest incredibly high mortality rates. Many workers would have died from accidents, exhaustion, disease, or simply being worked to death. Their bodies would have been quickly replaced, Another nameless statistic in Rome's relentless march of progress. The aqueducts of Rome stand today as magnificent monuments, admired by millions. You gaze upon their arches and instantly recognize the genius of Roman engineering. But as you reflect on their construction, try to hear the silent whispers of those who built them. The groan of straining muscles, the panting breaths in dusty tunnels, the terrified cries from dizzying heights. These structures, so vital and beautiful, are also stark reminders of the immense human suffering that formed their very foundations. Their legacy is one of unparalleled brilliance, but forever intertwined with the brutal, often fatal, ascent of those who brought them to life. You can certainly appreciate the clean water from your tap a little more deeply now. You've witnessed the agonizing ascent of aqueducts, built with unimaginable human effort. Now, let's delve into another core innovation of Roman engineering: concrete. Imagine staring at the imposing, seemingly indestructible walls of the Pantheon, or the vast vaults of the Colosseum. These structures, marvels of longevity and scale, owe their existence to Roman concrete, a revolutionary material. But its strength and durability weren't just a triumph of chemistry, they were forged through an incredibly intensive, often dangerous, manual labor process. From the quarrying of raw ingredients to its final, massive form. Roman concrete, known as opus caementicium, wasn't quite like the modern concrete you're familiar with. It was a mix of lime, volcanic ash pozzolana, especially from the Bay of Naples region, water, and aggregates like broken stones, bricks, or even rubble. What made it revolutionary was the pozzolana, which gave it hydraulic properties, meaning it could set under water and was incredibly durable, resistant to both fresh and salt water. This allowed for the construction of harbors, bridges, and vast vaulted structures previously unimaginable. But the production and mixing of this material required immense, grinding labor. The first brutal step was the quarrying of raw materials. You'd be involved in extracting lime from limestone quarries and the unique pozzolana ash from volcanic regions. This work was as dangerous and backbreaking as any other quarrying operation, involving hammers, chisels, and the constant threat of rockfalls or exhaustion. The raw materials then had to be transported, often over significant distances, to the construction sites. Imagine carting heavy sacks of lime and volcanic ash on your back, or in slow, creaking ox carts, over dusty, uneven roads. This initial stage alone was a testament to relentless, manual effort. Once at the site, the various components of concrete had to be meticulously prepared. The lime had to be slaked, a process that involved mixing quicklime with water, generating intense heat. This created a reactive binder. You'd be working with caustic materials, without protective gear, risking burns and respiratory irritation from the fumes. The volcanic ash and aggregates then had to be painstakingly measured and mixed. This wasn't done by machine, it was done by hand, in large pits or on platforms. Imagine yourself as part of a gang of enslaved people or laborers, shoveling, stirring, and stomping these ingredients together. The sheer physicality of mixing tons of concrete by hand, ensuring a consistent mixture, was immense. The aggregate materials, broken stone, brick, or pottery shards, had to be manually crushed and sorted to the correct sizes. This often involved breaking down old structures or quarrying new rock, adding another layer of brutal, dusty labor to the process. The transportation of the mixed concrete to where it was needed was another back-breaking task. Unlike modern concrete, which can be pumped, Roman concrete was carried in baskets or buckets. You'd be part of a human chain, passing heavy loads of wet concrete up scaffolding, across narrow planks, or into deep foundations. Imagine the constant strain, the risk of slipping and falling, especially when working at height on a massive structure like an aqueduct or a multi-story building. A single misstep could send you, and the heavy load, tumbling down, injuring or killing yourself and others below. The actual placement of concrete was equally labor-intensive. Roman concrete wasn't poured as a liquid, it was often laid in courses, almost like masonry, compacted into wooden formwork. You'd be shoveling the wet mix into these forms, then tamping it down with heavy tools to remove air pockets and ensure density. This compaction was crucial for the strength of the finished product, but it added another layer of rhythmic, exhausting physical effort. The layers would then be allowed to set before the next course was added. A less commonly known detail is the frequent incorporation of rubble, broken bricks, and even old pottery shards as aggregate. This practical use of waste material was efficient, but it also meant more manual sorting, breaking, and hauling for the laborers. For particularly massive structures, the core would be filled with this concrete mix, then faced with brick or stone, creating incredibly thick and durable walls. The sheer volume of material required for structures like the Baths of Caracalla or the Pantheon meant that thousands of tons of aggregate had to be processed and incorporated by hand. The constant exposure to caustic materials like lime without protection meant chronic skin irritation, burns, and respiratory problems for the laborers. The dust from crushing aggregates and mixing dry ingredients would fill the air, leading to debilitating lung conditions over time. There were no masks, no protective clothing beyond perhaps a simple tunic. Your body was constantly assaulted by the very materials you were working with. Historians still debate the precise formula variations of Roman concrete and how much the different types of pozzolana influenced its final strength. However, there is no debate about the labor involved. The revolutionary material, which allowed for unprecedented scale and flexibility in design, relied entirely on the brute force and expendability of human life. The genius of the engineers lay in understanding the properties of the materials, but the actual physical realization of their designs was a triumph of human endurance under duress. The majestic domes and enduring arches of Roman architecture, standing proudly for nearly 2 millennia, are silent testaments to the power of opus caementicium. But as you marvel at their longevity, try to visualize the invisible hands that mixed, carried, and tamped down every single bucket of that revolutionary material. The burning lungs, the blistered hands, the aching backs, these were the true human ingredients in Roman concrete. Its cruel core wasn't just its chemical composition, but the systemic exploitation that ensured its widespread use. It's a stark reminder that even the most innovative materials have a human price tag attached, a hidden cost that lingers long after the dust settles. You can certainly be grateful for modern machinery that saves countless bodies from such brutal labor. You've explored the dense, arduous world of Roman concrete production. Now, let's widen our view and consider a more encompassing, yet equally brutal aspect of Roman engineering's dark side, the often unseen victims of urbanization. Imagine the grandeur of a Roman city, towering buildings, bustling markets, elaborate public spaces. You might envision a vibrant, thriving metropolis. But for the vast majority of its inhabitants, particularly the working classes and the enslaved, Roman urban life was built on a foundation of cramped housing, sanitation nightmares, and constant peril, a stark contrast to the grand facades. Roman cities, especially Rome itself, were incredibly densely populated. As the empire grew, so did its urban centers, attracting vast numbers of people seeking work, opportunity, or simply survival. This rapid growth, fueled by both free migration and the influx of enslaved populations, created immense pressure on housing and infrastructure. The result for the ordinary Roman was often a life lived in conditions that would shock you today. The most common form of housing for the working class and the poor was the insula. Imagine a multi-story apartment block, often poorly constructed from timber and brick, rising 5 or 6 stories high. You'd live in a small, cramped room, perhaps shared with several family members or even strangers. These insulae were notoriously flimsy. Fires were a constant, terrifying threat, often sweeping through entire neighborhoods, trapping and killing thousands. You'd wake up to the smell of smoke, the cries of panic, knowing that your flimsy home could be reduced to ashes in minutes. Collapses were also common due to poor construction and overloading. Living in an insula was a constant gamble with your safety, a stark contrast to the sprawling villas of the wealthy. Sanitation within these insulae was almost non-existent. While we've praised Roman public aqueducts and sewers, These grand systems rarely extended into the individual apartments of the poor. You wouldn't have running water or private toilets in your insula. Instead, you'd rely on communal latrines if available and accessible or, more often, chamber pots. The contents of these pots were frequently emptied directly into the narrow, crowded streets below, adding to the pervasive filth and stench. Imagine walking down a Roman alleyway, trying to avoid the refuse and human waste flung from windows above. This lack of proper waste disposal created a breeding ground for disease. The streets themselves, especially in crowded working-class districts, were a constant source of health hazards. You'd navigate through refuse, animal waste, and spilled goods, all contributing to a pervasive foul odor and attracting vermin. Despite some regulations against street dumping, enforcement was often lax, and the sheer volume of waste from a dense population overwhelmed rudimentary systems. This omnipresent filth meant that diseases like dysentery, cholera, and various skin infections were rampant, constantly threatening your health. A simple cut could become infected, and a common cold could quickly turn into something far more serious in such unsanitary conditions. Beyond the physical dangers, the noise and crowding of Roman urban life were themselves a form of torment. Imagine the constant din of carts rattling over cobblestones, vendors shouting, crowds jostling, and the general cacophony of thousands of people living in close proximity. Sleep would be a luxury, constantly interrupted. This perpetual sensory assault, combined with the lack of personal space, would undoubtedly take a toll on your mental and physical well-being. There was little respite from the ceaseless activity of the city. One of the more unique, and certainly unsettling, aspects was the constant threat of disease epidemics. While Romans built impressive public health infrastructure, their lack of understanding of germ theory meant that when a contagious disease, like plague or smallpox, swept through the empire, it devastated densely populated urban centers. You'd witness your neighbors, your family members, succumb quickly, with little understanding of how to stop the spread or how to treat the sick. The very efficiency of Roman roads and trade routes, while beneficial for commerce, also served as superhighways for disease, allowing contagions to spread rapidly across the empire. Historians still debate the specific causes and mortality rates of major Roman plagues, but their devastating impact on urban populations is undeniable. Even for those involved in the construction and maintenance of these cities, the work was brutal. While the grand public works like the Colosseum or the Forum were built with the forced labor we've discussed, the everyday construction and maintenance of urban areas, the endless repairs to roads, the cleaning of public spaces, the digging of new foundations for insula, also relied on a vast underclass. You'd be part of this continuous, unglamorous cycle of labor, constantly exposed to the dangers of construction and the squalor of the urban environment. The brutal truth of Roman urbanization is that for every gleaming monument and impressive public bath, there was a vast, sprawling underside of human misery. The engineering marvels were often funded by and built upon a system that neglected the basic living conditions and health of the majority of its citizens. The Roman genius for large-scale organization and construction didn't always translate into a comfortable or healthy life for the average city dweller. You were a pawn in a grand game, your well-being secondary to the empire's ambitions. As the sounds of the bustling Roman city begin to fade, and the image of cramped, disease-ridden insulae gives way to the vastness of your own comfortable space, you're left with a profound understanding. The glittering facade of Roman urban planning hid a dark reality for millions. The glory of Rome was not for everyone, and its monumental achievements were often born from the suffering of its unseen, unheard victims. It certainly makes you grateful for modern urban planning, building codes, and sanitation systems, however imperfect. The next time you stroll through a city park or enjoy clean air in an open space, remember the brutal truth about Roman urbanization and the price paid by so many for their monumental cities. You've contemplated the grim realities of Roman urbanization and its toll on the masses. Now, let's turn to the most visible, yet paradoxically, most brutal manifestation of Roman engineering's dark side: the price of spectacle. Imagine yourself entering the roar of the Colosseum, the vast amphitheatrum Flavium, packed with tens of thousands of cheering spectators. Or perhaps you're witnessing a grand naval battle reenactment in a specially flooded arena. These spectacles, designed to entertain, control, and awe the Roman populace, demanded engineering feats of unprecedented scale and complexity. But behind every triumphant roar and every dazzling display lay an unseen foundation of immense human sacrifice and deadly construction methods. The Colosseum stands as the ultimate symbol of Roman engineering. You gaze upon its majestic arches, its multi-tiered seating, and its intricate network of underground passages. This was a structure capable of hosting gladiator contests, wild beast hunts, and even mock naval battles by flooding its arena. Its construction was a marvel of planning, logistics, and material science, integrating concrete, stone, and brick on a colossal scale. But its creation, and the creation of countless other amphitheaters, circuses, and theaters across the empire, came at an unimaginable human cost. The sheer volume of labor required to build the Colosseum alone was staggering. Imagine thousands of workers, primarily enslaved people, prisoners of war, and impoverished laborers, toiling simultaneously on different sections of the massive structure. You'd be hauling massive blocks of travertine marble from quarries miles away, hoisting them into place with rudimentary cranes powered by human or animal treadmills. The sun would beat down mercilessly, the dust would choke your lungs, and the constant threat of injury or death hung heavy in the air. The techniques used were those we've discussed: heavy lifting, intricate scaffolding, and the precise fitting of massive stones. But the scale amplified the danger. Working at the immense heights required for the Colosseum's upper tiers meant a slip could send you plummeting hundreds of feet to the ground or the stony arena below. Trenches for foundations could collapse, burying workers alive. The sheer weight of the materials being moved and placed meant crushing injuries were common. And with no modern safety protocols, these risks were simply part of the job. You'd work until you dropped, and if you died, another body would simply take your place. Beyond the Colosseum, think of the Circus Maximus, the vast chariot racing stadium that could hold over 150,000 spectators. Its sheer size required monumental earth-moving, complex seating structures, and intricate systems for starting gates and racetracks. Or consider the construction of artificial lakes for mock naval battles, which involved massive excavation and ingenious waterproofing. Each of these spectacles, designed to thrill and distract, represented a brutal expenditure of human life and labor. The very ground you stood on as a spectator was packed with the sweat and sacrifice of countless anonymous workers. A particularly disturbing aspect was the use of animals in these spectacles, and the engineering required to manage them. The Colosseum, for instance, had an intricate network of underground passages and elevators hypogeum designed to bring wild beasts and gladiators up into the arena. Building this subterranean labyrinth involved deep excavation, complex machinery operated by human power, and constant work in dark, dangerous conditions. You'd be down in the damp, claustrophobic tunnels, working alongside the smells of animal waste, operating treadmills that lifted cages weighing tons. The constant threat of being crushed or attacked by a wild animal being moved added another layer of terror to the already brutal work. Historians still debate the precise mechanisms of some of these elevators, but all agree they were ingenious feats of human-powered engineering. The construction of these grand structures was also often rushed, driven by the whims of emperors eager to leave their mark or placate the populace. This urgency inevitably led to greater risks for the laborers. Imagine being pressured to work faster, to cut corners, knowing that your life was on the line for the emperor's glory. This pressure cooker environment undoubtedly increased the death and injury rates on these massive projects. Furthermore, the very purpose of these spectacles was often brutal. They celebrated violence, death, and human subjugation. The engineering that created the perfect stage for gladiator fights or public executions was intrinsically linked to the dark heart of Roman entertainment. The precision of the arena floor, the efficiency of the crowd control, the elaborate trapdoors and lifts, all were designed to enhance the brutality and the visceral experience for the audience. You might admire the engineering, but you'd also be acutely aware of what it enabled. The quarries that supplied the marble and stone for these grand buildings, and the mines that provided the metals for their tools and mechanisms, were, as we've discussed, places of immense human suffering. The entire chain of creation, from raw material to finished spectacle, was steeped in exploitation. The dazzling white marble of the Colosseum had a hidden crimson stain. Historians still contend whether the Romans truly understood the long-term health effects of the dust, lead, and other hazardous materials their laborers were exposed to. While direct evidence of such awareness is scarce, the overwhelming focus on completion and cost efficiency suggests that worker well-being was simply not a priority. The price of spectacle was not just financial, it was paid in human lives, health, and dignity. The enduring grandeur of Roman amphitheaters and circuses, their vast scale and ingenious mechanics, continue to inspire awe. You stand before the Colosseum and feel the weight of history. But as you do, remember the unseen cost. Remember the countless hands that broke the stone, the bodies that strained against the ropes, the lives lost in the pursuit of entertainment and imperial glory. These structures are not just monuments to Roman engineering brilliance. They are also silent, sprawling testaments to a brutal system that exploited human beings to create its most spectacular achievements. It certainly makes you grateful for modern unions and worker safety laws. You've stood in the shadowed halls of Roman engineering's triumphs. And now, as our journey through its brutal dark side concludes, let's reflect on its legacy's lingering shadow. Imagine looking back across 2 millennia, not just at the grand arches and resilient roads, but at the immense human cost embedded within them. The brilliance of Roman engineering is undeniable. Their innovations in concrete, their vast networks of roads and aqueducts, their mastery of large-scale construction revolutionized the ancient world and continue to awe us today. Yet, this brilliance is inseparable from the systemic brutality and exploitation that fueled its monumental achievements. The most profound part of this lingering shadow is, undeniably, the systemic reliance on slavery and forced labor. You've witnessed how millions of enslaved people, prisoners of war, and conquered populations were treated as mere tools, their lives disposable in the pursuit of imperial ambition. This foundational reliance on unfree labor allowed Rome to undertake projects of a scale unmatched until the Industrial Revolution. It meant that human muscle was cheaper than technological innovation, stifling the development of labor-saving machinery that might have emerged otherwise. The very concept of human rights, worker safety, or fair compensation was alien to this model. This dark aspect continues to haunt the historical narrative, forcing us to reconcile admiration for engineering prowess with condemnation of its ethical underpinnings. The human cost in raw material extraction also leaves a deep scar. From the suffocating dust of the mines to the perilous work in the quarries, you've seen how the very stone and metal that built Rome's glory were extracted through unimaginable suffering. These places were often death sentences, transforming human bodies into expendable resources. The environmental impact, too, was significant. Though often unacknowledged in historical accounts, vast landscapes were scarred to provide the materials for urban expansion and monumental construction. This extractive model, driven by insatiable demand, set a precedent for resource exploitation that would be repeated throughout history. Roman engineering's legacy is also marked by its disregard for workers' safety and health. You've encountered the constant dangers: collapsing tunnels, falling stones, precarious scaffolding, and the relentless toll of physical exhaustion, heat stroke, and disease. The air filled with dust from construction and quarries, the exposure to caustic materials like lime, and the lack of basic sanitation for laborers all contributed to high rates of injury, illness, and premature death. There were no safety regulations, no medical care for the injured beyond the most basic, and certainly no compensation for those left maimed or ill. The lives of the workers were cheap, and their suffering was simply factored into the cost of doing business. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the unquestionable technical achievements. The Romans revolutionized the use of concrete, developing a material that allowed for unprecedented scale, flexibility, and durability in their structures. Their mastery of the arch, the vault, and the dome enabled the creation of vast interior spaces and monumental spans. Their precision in surveying and constructing roads and aqueducts, often across challenging terrain, remains astonishing. These innovations were passed down through generations, influencing architecture and engineering for centuries, directly contributing to the development of many modern building techniques. You can trace lines of influence from Roman designs to Renaissance cathedrals and even some modern bridges. Historians still debate the specific Roman influences on later engineering, but their foundational impact is clear. The organizational genius of Roman engineering also left a lasting mark. Their ability to plan, fund, and execute projects on an imperial scale, mobilizing vast quantities of labor and resources, was unprecedented. The legions, acting as both soldiers and engineers, were a highly effective, if brutal, construction force. This capacity for large-scale project management and logistical coordination is a less tangible but equally significant part of their legacy, a skill that subsequent empires and nations would learn from, even if they applied it in less brutal ways. But the brilliance and the brutality remain inextricably linked. You cannot celebrate the Pantheon without acknowledging the enslaved hands that mixed its concrete, or marvel at the aqueducts without hearing the echoes of suffering from their construction. The dark side of Roman engineering is not a separate chapter. It is woven into the very fabric of its most admired achievements. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about progress, power, and ethics. The lingering shadow of Roman engineering serves as a powerful reminder that monumental achievements, while awe-inspiring, often have a hidden human cost. It urges you to look beyond the polished surface of history and delve into the lives of those who built it, often silently, often brutally. It challenges you to consider the ethical dimensions of progress and the responsibility we bear for how our own societies are built.